I'm very happy to have you here even on Saturday morning. I'm sure that you are the chosen one if you are here. And I will try, being the first this morning, I will try to not to bore you too much, but also to give you some pieces of theory, because we are talking about two major concepts, the concept of frozen conflict and the one of forgotten conflict. And if you want to have the suitable tool for me to make the point, you need also to know the background of those concepts. So let me give you also a bit of history, and let's talk about a periodization of the contemporary conflicts. As you know, the contemporary history begins with the First World War, and generally the specialists in that particular field I'm a part of, I'm teaching conflict analysis, are separated it in generations, so-called generations of conflict. The first generation of conflict would begin with the First World War and will end at the end of the Second World War. Basically, we are talking about a system, an international system, where we have coalitions of states that are opposing one to another. The specific type of conflict in that particular first generation is the World War, meaning a war that involves countries all over the world, not only in one continent, usually the European one. And the system was drawn at that time by what we called the League of Nations. It was a type of system trying to deal with the situation, and the Wilsonian principles, who basically ended the First World War. The second generation is the Cold War. We have a bipolar system, we have war through intermediaries, we have the threat and the deterrence that is offered by the nuclear weapons, the mutual self-destruction, ensured self-destruction. And in that particular world, we have the UN, who is responsible for somehow managing the system. And at the same time, there's a period where we do face the decolonization process, coming with other types of conflict of the same, that are coming from the decolonization and the borders establishment. The second and a half generation is the one that runs from the end, the 89, the end of the Cold War, 89 or 91, the fall of the Soviet Union, until 9/11. It's a period of transition. Basically, it's a multipolar world with an anarchic periphery. It's a system where basically the decision-making is shifting from the formal one at the UN Security Council to G7, G7 plus 1, G8, where the big decisions were taken. And in that particular period, we have the characteristic of the ethnic and interreligious conflict, as well as separatist conflicts. And after 9/11, we are talking about global conflict, the third generation of conflict. We have global actors, network actors, non-state actors involved and challenging the international order, being directly involved in the whole process. At the same time, we can see that the system is moving back from the G8 decisions step by step, especially after the Libyan war, to once again to the UN Security Council, and that's what we see nowadays in Syria, for instance. I pass through those generations of conflicts in order to underline the moment and to come back to the frozen conflicts. The frozen conflicts are basically the ones that appeared in the post-Soviet space. We are talking about 4 of them. Basically, the design is that there were basically separatist conflicts appeared at the end of the Soviet Union and during the fall of the Soviet Union. Interethnic and interreligious, except for Transnistria. In some cases, this idea of frozen has been driven by the fact that there were ad hoc peacekeeper structures, operations, done by using the official recognized state capabilities, the separatist state capabilities, and Russia's so-called peacekeepers. So this was the format, at least for 3 of the conflicts, Nagorno-Karabakh put aside. And at the same time, we had institutionalized formats of solving those conflicts, either under OSCE aegis, either under the UN aegis. So the idea was to conserve those conflicts, not to solve them, and to block any type of heating. As you have seen, beginning with 2008, some tremendous changes did appear. In the case of Abkhazia and Southern Ossetia, we had the first invasion of Russia, of a state, into a neighbor state after the end of the Cold War. In Transnistria, things moved to a different direction in the sense that regional authorities have been recognized at some respect as regional authorities and not as state authorities by the authorities in Chisinau who engage them. In the case of Nagorno-Karabakh, we still have the standoff, but with exchange of fires on the line of demarcation or on the bilateral border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So, what about the forgotten conflict? Well, the 3rd generation conflict I already underlined has the specificity, if you want, the specific that at the same time we have conflicts coming from the 2nd generation, like Middle East, like India-Pakistan war, like decolonization wars in Sahel. At the same time, we have the 2.5 generation conflicts that we didn't solve, and then that are superposed on this. We do have in all these lines religious conflict and ethnical background for this 2nd generation conflict. And for sure, above all, we have the 3rd generation conflict, meaning the use of terrorists, non-state actors involved in this very region. So the characteristic of those forgotten conflicts is the fact that by not solving them in due time and by prolonging them, the other types of conflict were superposed, and there's a mutual influence in between the generations of conflict, so that we have in hand now a complexity of those conflicts that makes them being forgotten conflicts. Forgotten not from the fact that they don't have a system or there are not trials to solve them, but because the time spent in maintaining those conflicts made them forgotten in the sense of our lack of capacity of addressing them because of this interdependence of the layers. At the same time, we have a lot of actors in the region who begin to have conscience of the existing of the conflict and are using the existing of the conflict. So we have another difficulty. The conflicts provides incentives for a lot of actors in the region, and I will draw your attention specifically on Transnistria, for instance. It's very easy to have a no man's land and to blame everything on no man's land, and everybody can take profits on this situation. So, how to avoid frozen conflict not to become forgotten conflict? Frozen conflicts are conflicts of 2 decades. It's long enough because if you're looking very attentively, the time frame in between the 2 world wars was 21 years. So 2 decades is quite enough time, but it's not too much for them to move into a type of forgotten conflict. In 2 cases, we already have the heating of the conflicts, Abkhazia, Southern Ossetia. In the case of Transnistria, there's an interesting way of addressing it. In the case of Nagorno-Karabakh, we are the closest to move it to a type of forgotten conflict. So how to avoid this? Basically, at this point, we do have NATO and the European Union who are offering some soft power, some tools, some major tools, mechanisms, projects that I think that Azerbaijan, for that matter, should not reject. Those instruments are useful for development and for maintaining this interest for the conflict at the international area. As you know, NATO, for instance, is about contribution, is about NATO missions. Azerbaijan is involved in such a process. It's about improving the security sector reform, so supporting the states involved in a type of partnership for peace with NATO. To do so, it's about interoperability of the military capabilities, and it is about, in that particular case, the support for the transit military lines in and out of Afghanistan. As you know, Romanian embassy in Baku is a NATO contact point, and our officials are working together with the Azeri authorities and together with the General Secretariat of NATO, with the headquarters, in order to improve this type of relations, and we are saluting the commitment that Azeri authorities have on that particular relation with NATO. The second actor in line is European Union who has unique instruments of soft power. It's offering some concrete projects, as I was telling you, mechanisms and tools inside the what we call Eastern Partnership. And I'm talking about the association agreement, which is the framework for a relation with the EU. I'm talking about the visa liberalization system and the DCFTA, Deep and Comprehensive Free Trade Agreement. As you know, this type of proposal is designed for all the countries in Eastern Partnership. Some of them have more to gain from this, some of them less. The case of Azerbaijan, we can recognize its economic capacity is making it less interested for this type of mechanism. But at the same time, what is important is that this type of mechanism and this type of offer is giving to Azerbaijan some soft power and some tools that cannot be duplicated. For instance, the visa liberalization system is the one addressing, and I will draw your attention on what's happened in Transnistria because it's the most developed case in that area, in spite of the problems that they are facing nowadays. So, once the citizens are addressed, once the companies in the separatist region are addressed via the DCFTA, even if the authorities, the regional authorities in Tiraspol, are not interested at this point, it is a very important tool of attraction and integration or reintegration of the region. Then the local authorities, those in place now or the future one, will come, will follow. This important tool is not to be rejected also from another point of view. If one party is rejecting it, maybe the other will take advantage of it. And I'm sure, as you know, Armenia as well is involved in this type of process. So it's important, once, to have those tools in hand and to use them. Second, not to prevent an unbalanced use of such tools in the region. So I think that could be a part of the instruments that could be used to, in order to prevent frozen conflicts to move to forgotten conflicts. This being said, I want also to underline once again Romania's position towards the frozen conflicts, which is very clearly stated. It's about the support for territorial integrity of the states, for sovereignty of those states, and for political independence of the states, meaning of inside the recognized international borders.